The superpower you're after, which you actually can acquire through this practice, is to realize that virtually all of your psychological suffering, and actually arguably virtually all of your physical suffering, is a matter of being lost in thought. It's a matter of thinking without knowing that you're thinking. And what mindfulness does, and really any technique of meditation ultimately should do, is teach you to break the spell of being lost in thought and to notice a thought as a thought. I mean, the huge difference is, until you learn how to meditate or do something like meditation, you're just helplessly thinking every moment of your life. You're having a conversation with yourself. You're having content, whether it's imagistic or linguistic, pour forth into consciousness every moment, and so incessantly that you don't even notice it. It's just white noise. And not only does it completely color your experience moment to moment. So like if they're angry thoughts, you're angry. If they're depressed thoughts, you're depressed. If they're sad, you're sad. So you become your thoughts, but you also feel identified. You feel that you are the thinker of your thoughts. You feel like a self, and it's completely structured by this flow of mentation every moment, and it produces everything you do. It produces all of your intentions and your goals and your actions, and he said this about me, and now I'm going to say this. I mean, so it's like it's everything coming out of you is born of this same process, and meditation is a way of recognizing that consciousness, I mean, what you are subjectively, is this prior condition of just awareness in which everything is showing up, sounds, sensations, and thoughts. And thoughts can become just other objects of consciousness.
Yeah, it sucks, man. The brain is an organ and it malfunctions, and sometimes you go nuts, and you get stigmatized for it, which really sucks, because because that just adds to the problem. Like if you see somebody in a cast, and you're like, oh, what happened to your arm? And they'll tell you, oh, whatever, I fell down. But you talk to someone who's been like hospitalized for a few weeks, and they tell you, yeah, I had to go to the hospital. I had a nervous breakdown. I went crazy, shit my pants, threw my dog through a window. You're like, you want to be compassionate, but there's some part of you that's like, oh, now this is a crazy person. It's like, it's just something happened. The operating system temporarily crashed, and quite often, I think that could be a very good thing. I think that having your personality or your ego or crash can often mean that you were trying to be somebody that you aren't. And some people invest so much energy in trying to... Yeah, they just want to be something, They since they were a kid, their mother was telling them you should be like this, and then they try to be like this, and they hold up this thing. They're always working to hold up this giant tail feather, and their arms start shaking, and then they can't hold it up, and that's when they have like anger outbursts, or suddenly like their friends are like, you turned into someone that I've never met. I don't even know who that is. It's like, no. That is, you met them. You met underneath the tail feather, the seething sea of anger and disappointment and sadness. You met that thing that they're trying to avoid by looking up at this mask that they're holding up to the world. But that fucking seething sea of disappointment and anger and horror and sadness, that's where it's at, man. You got to go into that thing. And for some people, the only way they can go into that is by having a full-scale nervous breakdown, because then they can have permission to dive into that awful vortex of darkness, because underneath that vortex of darkness is paradise. Underneath that, that's love and happiness and joy and connection and tranquility and all that stuff. And everyone thinks that the way to get to that point is by avoiding this awful black forest that surrounds the Garden of Eden, which is inside everybody. It's inside everybody. It's there. And it doesn't matter, you can work out, and that will definitely give you a temporary good feeling. But until you address the internal structures that you haven't acknowledged, you're always going to go back to that place where you find yourself morose and depressed and angry, and you don't know why. You always go back to that place until you sit with the sadness inside of you. You have to do that.
What you're describing is coming out of the closet. and you know.
Yeah, for a lot of people, that is
Right?
what it is, man.
Yeah.
It's coming out of the closet, and there's a lot of closets,
There are a lot of
man.
closets,
There's not just
exactly.
the gay closet.
Right.
There's all kinds of closet. There's the artist closet. Some people are fucking accountants. They're wearing suits and their ties on tight, and they're fucking like organized and disciplined. But inside, they're probably painters. They probably want to fucking paint. They want to paint day glow mountains down at the beach. That's what they really are. But their daddy or their mommy wanted them to be a good little businessman. So they became this thing that's the opposite of what they are. This is the verse in the Bhagavad Gita. God forgive me because I've quoted it way too many times, but it's better to be an honest street sweeper than a dishonest king. It's better to be a happy guy brushing fucking leaves up the street than it is to be some zillionaire who inside is dying or numb or miserable. Mostly numb. Numb's the word. Most people are just numb.
But as long as these people can quantify on paper, I still have a X $million home. My car still costs X $1,000. This suit is an X suit. I am still ahead. I am not going to abandon all these things.
As long as they don't see through the bullshit
Well,
of the game they think they're winning.
They have to fall. Yeah, it's almost like you have to fall to really. That's what you got to appreciate, those moments when it all falls apart on you, because that means you've got an opportunity to try it again. Let's take a new, fresh perspective.
And it's a beautiful idea, which is that heartbreak is actually your ego cracking. And the moment that cracks, you're in the experience of truth. And when you're in the experience of truth, that's when you can really become who you are. But to get to who you are, it's like when a bone heals the wrong way. Like that's what a lot of people's entire personality is. It's like a bone that grew the wrong way, and that needs a fucking a snap, a crack, and you get that through
And a pop.
You need that initial fucking thing, and
It's a beautiful analogy.
and it hurts. It hurts, but we're pain avoiding creatures, so we think so we're always running away from this pain, but the problem is, as we're running away from pain, we're still exactly in pain. It's basically like being on fire and running away from water. You're just running away from the water because I don't know, that's a stupid analogy actually.
No, you were doing great up until that, though.
Yeah.
You had a lot of great points.
Well,
there.
it's true.
Broken bone.
There's the monster in the dark, and the faster you run, the more likely you are to run into something that's actually going to hurt you, as opposed to turning around and saying, "Oh, fuck, there is no monster."
No monster.
But you're never going to know that until you stop and turn around.
Yeah.
And in some cases, people don't have the discipline or the assistance or the balls to stop and turn around, so they have to trip over something. And then there's like, oh, look.
Yep.
So the struggle between other people's perceptions and your own wants and desires and who you truly are, your significant real self.
That's it. That's all there is. You tell me a story that we engaged in, that's famous, that's not about this journey. I'll give you an example. The prodigal son. Parable, Christian, seems religious, doesn't really make much sense. Do you know the story?
Sure, but why don't you lay it out?
So there's a father. He has two sons, an older son, a younger son. And he says to them, who wants to spend their inheritance? The younger son says, me, Dad, I'll go and spend it. And the younger son takes all the dough and he runs off and sniffs coke off strippers' tits for a number of years until he realises this is getting pretty boring and I'm in a lot of trouble. He ends up throwing food to pigs. That's his job. And he can't even eat the food that he gives to the pigs, at which point he says, Dad, will you take me back? Dad then they don't meet. This somehow happens, not through telephones, it just happens. At which point, Dad goes to the fatted calf, says, kill the fatted calf. Older son says, hold on, Dad, what's going on? I've stayed with you since the beginning. I've been loyal to you. And I hear the stories of my younger brother coming back, who's been sniffing coke off strippers' tits for the last God knows how many years. And you're prepared to kill the fatted calf. What's the SP, Dad? I want to know the story. He says, you're all right, son. Don't worry about that. You take a little step to the side. You'll always be with me. You're a good boy. At which point he goes out to meet the prodigal son, the wasteful son. The wasteful son returns and he says, you were lost and now you're found. That's the end of the story. it's quite hard to make sense of that in a literal sense. You go, oh, Dad was a bit unfair. He should have been kind to the older son because he never ran off and did anything. But the essence of the story is that you are the father. You are enough. Your older son is your intellect. He says, oh, don't do this, don't do that. He's trying to reconcile, make sense of a prosaic and material world. The younger son, being the wild, feral entity that he is, wants to go out in the world and find out what it's all about. So in his recklessness and sense of adventure, he finds that he can't escape himself. So he has to return to himself. And at which point, he has to accept who he is. At which point, the intellect is left out of the equation pretty much as the older brother, because he can't understand the significance of the journey of the wasteful brother. In the end, you have to leave yourself to understand the value of yourself. You have to lose stuff before you realize that all the stuff that you're losing is ephemeral and transitory. It's not yours. You're enough. You're always enough. But you've got to somehow prostitute yourself before you realize your own value. That is the essence of all stories. You have to take possession of your life.
Is this a thought process that you have to constantly reaffirm, or is this cemented in your
it's
head?
exactly that. It's exactly that. You drift on this point.
Right.
And it is whatever form of meditation or mantra that you decide to espouse, there needs to be some period in your day where you remember that there's a world out there trying to tell you who you are, and there's a world in here that's trying to tell you who you are. Now, where do you want to put your eggs? Because the world outside is very noisy and very tempting, and it has all the razzmatazz, has all the tinsel and all the glitter. So own the game, accept the rules, and move on into the rules. So the world will try and tell you who you are, and you have to tell yourself who you are. And there's this ongoing battle. And somehow there needs to be a reconciliation between the two. But in the end, you've got to have all the eggs in your basket.